The cold wind howled across the barren surface of Hades IV, a forgotten moon once teeming with life, now reduced to nothing more than a desolate relic. The transmission had been cryptic but undeniable. A burst of ancient Earth frequencies, decoded by an unlikely source, pointed to one singular truth. Humanity's Heir, presumed lost for centuries, was alive. Rail awoke in the shadows of a shattered city, their senses alert, heart pounding. The ruins around them told a haunting tale of a civilization forgotten. Tall, angular structures of glass and steel now lay in ruin, twisted by time and war. Once a symbol of prosperity, they were now tombstones marking the end of a forgotten age. Rail's breath formed wisps in the chilled air as they rose from the cold concrete floor. Their mind was a blur, fragmented memories of a past long buried, but one thing was clear: Earth had abandoned them. But Rail had not forgotten. Earth's bloodline, the bloodline of kings and rulers, had not been obliterated by the Great Exodus, as many had believed. They were the last of it, the lost Scion, and the galaxy had yet to know they were still alive. With a final determined glance at the transmitter that had brought them here, Rail moved toward the entrance of the ruined building. The skies overhead were choked with the remnants of war, fragments of shattered starships and debris scattered in the blackened void. It was only a matter of time before the factions looking for Rail would find them. The transmission had drawn unwanted attention. As Rail neared the outskirts of the city, their sharp senses detected the faint hum of engines in the distance. Rail's instincts kicked in, sending them running through alleyways and crumbling structures, the echoes of pursuing footsteps growing louder behind them. It didn't take long for the realization to hit. They were being hunted. The hunters weren't just any mercenaries or bounty hunters. They were part of the Crimson Syndicate, a ruthless faction that had long searched for any trace of Earth's lost royalty. Rail could feel their pulse quicken. They knew too well how far the Syndicate would go to silence any threat to their power. The Syndicate, with its vast resources and brutal methods, had come close to tracking down the Heir before. Rail had been hidden too well for them to ever succeed. Until now. Just as Rail reached the edge of the city, a harsh light bathed the streets, and a distinct whine of advanced engines filled the air. A hovercraft, sleek and menacing, descended quickly from the sky, landing with a force that shook the ground beneath Rail's feet. 3 heavily armed soldiers disembarked, their faces masked, their weapons trained. "You can't outrun us forever, Heir," one of them called out, their voice distorted through a comm device. The words carried an undeniable malice, and Rail's hand instinctively went to the hidden energy blade on their waist. Rail could feel the weight of the title they had inherited settling on their shoulders. It was more than just the promise of leadership. It was the responsibility of saving what was left of humanity. With a grim resolve, Rail turned to face their pursuers, preparing for a confrontation they hadn't expected so soon. The battle would be fierce, but Rail had no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the galaxy, was on their shoulders. Every step from this moment would bring them closer to reclaiming what had been lost, but only if they survived the hunt. As the first blast of energy struck the ground near them, Rail sprang into action, the Heir's bloodline coursing with more than just royal authority. It carried a fire to fight for a future they were born to lead. Rail moved swiftly through the ruins of Hades IV, the dull echo of their footsteps swallowed by the eerily quiet moon. The hovercraft that had landed behind them still loomed nearby, its engines humming ominously. Rail's breath came in shallow bursts, but their resolve was clear. Every fibre of their being screamed for survival, not just for their own sake, but for humanity's future. The Crimson Syndicate's soldiers advanced cautiously, their sensors scanning the ruins for any sign of Rael's presence. The air was thick with the anticipation of a deadly game of cat and mouse. Rael had little time to waste. They needed to move, and they needed to move fast. There was a reason they had survived all these years in hiding. Secrets their ancestors had carefully buried, secrets that could tip the scales in the war to come. Rael ducked into the depths of an old research facility, long abandoned after the Great Exodus. The structure was a testament to human ingenuity, vaults of knowledge and power hidden beneath layers of metal and stone. Here, Rael had come for one thing: the key to unlocking the truth behind their bloodline's extraordinary legacy. Rael found the entrance to the facility's lower levels, a set of ancient doors still intact despite the ravages of time. With a few deft movements, they accessed the terminal beside the entrance. The dusty display flickered to life, a soft glow casting light over the darkened chamber. A series of encrypted files appeared on the screen, codes and symbols that only someone of Rael's lineage could decipher. As Rael connected the device to the terminal, memories from their childhood began to resurface, fragments of lessons taught by their guardian, an old war hero named Scion, who had hidden them away on remote worlds after the fall of Earth. Scion had spoken in riddles, hinting at the power Rael's family had once wielded, but he had never fully explained what was hidden within the royal bloodline. Now, in the quiet of this forgotten world, Rael could feel the weight of their ancestors' legacy pressing on them. They had the potential to rebuild what had been lost, but first, they needed to understand it. The terminal hummed with activity as Rael decrypted the ancient files. A map materialized on the screen, an intricate star chart that seemed to point to locations scattered across the galaxy. The files contained blueprints for powerful technologies, hidden caches of weapons, and systems of governance that could unite the fractured human factions. But the most striking piece of information was a single phrase: the Crimson Key. Rael's heart raced. The Crimson Key was a fabled artifact, said to be the ultimate power within the royal family's reach. Whoever controlled it could wield immense influence over not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. Legends spoke of it being locked away in a hidden vault, its location known only to the royal bloodline. Rael had always assumed it was just a myth, a fairy tale spun to inspire hope in humanity's darkest days. But now the truth was undeniable. The file revealed that the Crimson Key was no mere weapon. It was the key to unlocking a vast network of ancient war machines and advanced starships, relics of a time when humanity ruled the stars. These weapons had been scattered across the galaxy, hidden away for a time of reckoning. Rael's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp crack of a blaster shot, followed by the sound of boots pounding the ground. The Syndicate soldiers were getting closer. Rael quickly scanned the map, marking the location of the Crimson Key. It was far, on the other side of the galaxy, but they had no choice. They couldn't let the Syndicate, or any other power, gain control of such a force. They had to leave now. Rael wasn't just running from the Syndicate anymore. They were running towards something far more dangerous, a secret that could either save or doom humanity. And as the doors of the facility slammed shut behind them, Rael knew one thing for sure: the journey ahead would change everything. Rael sprinted through the maze of crumbling hallways, their every footfall echoing in the silence of the facility. The buzz of blaster shots and the heavy thud of boots pursuing them grew louder. The Syndicate soldiers weren't far behind. Rael's pulse raced in sync with their footsteps as they navigated the labyrinthine structure, their mind consumed by the revelation they'd just uncovered. The Crimson Key was real, and it was more powerful than anyone could have imagined. A heavy blast rattled the walls, narrowly missing Rail's shoulder. The Syndicate was getting desperate, but Rail knew better than to underestimate them. These mercenaries had been chasing the royal bloodline for decades, and now they were closing in. Rail slid into a narrow maintenance shaft, the metal walls slick with rust and age. It was cramped, but it offered some semblance of safety, at least for the moment. Their breath came in ragged gasps, the exhaustion from their sprinting starting to catch up. But Rail's resolve was unwavering. The map had shown them the way to the Crimson Key, and no matter what, they could not let the Syndicate intercept them. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders now. Sliding out of the shaft into a long, dark corridor, Rail came to an abrupt halt. Their eyes narrowed as a low hum filled the air. They could feel the pressure mounting, the oppressive weight of danger closing in. The Syndicate was using their own resources, hunting Rail with a precision born of years of practice. Just then, a flash of movement at the far end of the corridor caught Rail's attention. A figure, tall, cloaked in shadows, appeared. The person's presence was like a ripple in the air itself, their steps silent despite the heavy atmosphere of the facility. Rail's heart skipped a beat. For a split second, they wondered if it was another member of the Syndicate. But this figure wasn't like the soldiers pursuing them. There was something different about them, something strangely familiar. Rail, the figure spoke, their voice a deep, resonant tone. It wasn't a question but a command, a name spoken as though they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Rail tensed, reaching for the energy blade at their side, but the stranger raised a hand, signaling for peace. "You're not alone in this," the figure said, stepping closer into the dim light. The figure lowered their hood, revealing a face both striking and foreign, yet with an unmistakable glimmer of recognition. Rail's breath caught. The stranger was human, too human. There was something about them, something in the eyes that made Rail feel as if they were staring into a mirror. But how could this be? Who were they? You're one of them," Rail stammered, taking a hesitant step backward. The figure before them bore the unmistakable insignia of the old Earth monarchy, a symbol long thought destroyed in the wake of humanity's exodus. But no, this was impossible. How could anyone have survived from that era? The stranger's expression softened. "I was sent to find you, Rail. The time is running out. The Syndicate isn't the only threat you'll face. The galaxy is on the edge of collapse. There are those who will use the Crimson Key for their own gain." Rail's mind spun. This wasn't the moment they had expected. They had come to Hades IV to find answers, and now they were confronted with more questions than they had ever anticipated. Who was this person? And why did they know so much about the Crimson Key? "You were sent by who?" Rail demanded, still wary but desperate for information. The stranger's eyes grew more serious. "By someone who understands the true power of your bloodline, Rail. Someone who knows that the key is not just a weapon, it's a symbol. A symbol that can either unite or shatter the galaxy. If the Syndicate gets their hands on it first, everything will be lost." Rail felt a sudden rush of urgency. They didn't have time to question this mysterious figure, not with the Syndicate closing in and the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Without another word, the stranger extended their hand, offering Rail a small device, sleek, black, and marked with the same royal insignia. "This will help you. Trust me, Rail. It's time for you to lead." Rail stared at the device, then back at the stranger. There was no turning back. The galaxy was changing, and Rail had no choice but to step forward into the unknown. Taking the device, they nodded. "Lead the way." Rail followed the mysterious figure through the labyrinth of crumbling hallways, each step heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The device in their hand pulsed softly, an eerie light flickering on its surface. The stranger had not revealed much, but their words had struck deep. The Crimson Key was more than just a weapon. It was the galaxy's last hope or its final doom. Rail could feel the gravity of their task pressing harder with every passing second. "Where are we going?" Rail asked, trying to keep their voice steady despite the growing unease in their chest. "We need to get off this moon first," the stranger replied, their tone calm but urgent. "The Syndicate's forces are already searching the surface. They'll track us here if we don't leave now." Rail nodded, glancing over their shoulder to ensure they weren't being followed. The sound of distant engines reverberated through the cracked walls, but there was no sign of the Syndicate soldiers yet. Still, they couldn't afford to wait. With the stranger leading the way, Rail followed them through a side door that led out into the moon's twilight zone, an expanse of jagged terrain and ancient remnants of long-forgotten technology. The two moved swiftly, using the cover of dusk and the rocky outcrops to conceal their movements. Rail's mind was buzzing with questions. Who was this person? How had they survived for so long? And what was their connection to Rail's bloodline? But the stranger didn't speak again until they reached a hidden hangar tucked into the moon's surface, a place that had clearly not seen use in centuries. Rail's eyes widened as they entered the hangar. In the shadows, a massive vessel sat dormant, sleek, angular, and unmistakably human-made. It was unlike any ship Rail had seen before, but something about it felt familiar. It had the markings of the old Earth fleet, long since erased from history. This ship, Rail realized, was no relic. It was functional, powerful. "This is our way out," the stranger said, gesturing to the ship. "It's the last of its kind, one of the Royal Fleet's personal vessels. It's been hidden away, just like you." Rail stepped closer, the weight of this revelation almost too much to process. A ship like this, one of the few remaining of the Royal Fleet, could change everything. With it, they could fight back against the Syndicate, even if they had no idea where to begin. But first, they needed to survive. The stranger began activating the ship's systems, and as the ship hummed to life, a soft voice echoed through Rail's mind, faint but unmistakable. "Rail, you are the one. The bloodline will rise again." It was a memory, distant, fragmented, but it tugged at Rail's heart in ways they couldn't explain. "Are you hearing that?" Rail asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The stranger paused, their hands hovering over the control panel. Their eyes narrowed, recognizing the significance of what had just occurred. "It's the ship's A. It was programmed to recognize the Heir of the royal line when they returned. You've awakened it." Rail's heart skipped a beat. "So, this ship, everything, it was all for me." The stranger nodded solemnly. "Yes, it was built for a time when the royal family would lead humanity back into the stars. The key to unlocking its full potential lies in you, Rail. You must learn to harness it." Before Rail could respond, a distant rumble shook the hangar. The sound of engines, dozens of them, echoed through the vast chamber. The Syndicate had found them. They were no longer alone. "We don't have much time," the stranger said, urgency in their voice. "We need to leave now. Once you're in the cockpit, I'll explain everything. But we have to escape before the Syndicate realizes what we're carrying." Rail's hand instinctively went to the weapon at their side, the energy blade, their only defense against the coming storm. But the true power lay in the ship, and in the legacy that had been thrust upon them. With a final look at the stranger, Rail boarded the ship. As the ramp closed behind them, and the vessel's systems roared to life, they couldn't shake the feeling that their life, humanity's future, was about to change forever. The ship's engines roared to life as Rail settled into the pilot's seat, the controls warm beneath their fingers. The moment they touched the controls, a strange sensation washed over them, like an echo of something ancient, something buried deep within their very being. It wasn't just the ship that was awakening. Something inside of Rail was stirring too. It was a primal connection to the vessel, a bond that stretched across time and history. This ship, Rail, the stranger said, his voice now coming through the comms system, is more than just a means of transport. It's a weapon, a fortress, and a living entity all in one. It was designed to respond to your bloodline, your heritage. It's waiting for you to tap into its full potential. Rail gripped the controls tighter, the weight of his words sinking in. The ship seemed to hum in response to their touch, as if acknowledging the presence of the royal Heir. As the stranger had said, this wasn't just any ship. It was the last remnant of the old Earth fleet, one of the very vessels that had fought in the final battles before humanity's exile. The idea that it had been hidden away, waiting for them to return, felt like both a blessing and a curse. Rail took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. The Syndicate's forces were closing in, and they couldn't afford to waste time. They had to escape the moon, but the real challenge lay beyond that. The Crimson Key, the object that had drawn them here in the first place, was still out there, waiting to be found. They couldn't let the Syndicate gain control of it, and they couldn't let themselves be distracted by the dangers of the present. The future of humanity depended on their next move. "Prepare for launch," the stranger instructed, his voice calm but firm. "I'll handle the rest of the ship's systems. You just focus on getting us into the sky." Rail nodded, their fingers moving over the controls with a sense of purpose they hadn't felt before. The ship responded instantly, its systems sensing with their movements. For a moment, it felt like they were one with the vessel. Every maneuver, every command was effortless. It was as if the ship knew exactly what it needed to do and was simply waiting for Rail to give it direction. The hangar doors slid open, revealing the darkened landscape of the moon stretching out before them. The faint glow of distant stars illuminated the jagged rocks and desolate terrain. Rail's heart pounded in their chest as they pulled the throttle back, feeling the ship lurch forward. They were no longer on the ground. They were free, rising into the sky at a speed that took their breath away. The ship cut through the atmosphere like a blade through silk, the hull humming with power. "Good," the stranger's voice crackled in Rail's ear. "Now we need to go to the outer system. The Syndicate will send their forces after us, but we'll have a few minutes before they can scramble their ships." Rail didn't respond. Their focus was entirely on the controls, navigating through the stars, pushing the ship to its limits. They could feel the pulse of the Crimson Key deep within the ship, its energy vibrating in the core of their being. The key was not just a physical object. It was alive, connected to them in ways they couldn't yet understand. The first wave of Syndicate ships appeared on the sensors, their shapes blotting out the stars as they approached at high speed. Rail didn't hesitate. Their hands flew over the controls, and the ship responded instantly. It banked sharply, darting toward the asteroid belt that marked the edge of the system. The Syndicate ships followed, their engines flaring as they closed in. "This isn't just a chase," the stranger's voice warned. "The Syndicate won't stop until they have you. They'll use everything at their disposal." Rail's heart quickened as the ship weaved between asteroids, narrowly avoiding the blaster fire from the Syndicate ships. The air around them crackled with tension, the feeling of being hunted more palpable than ever. But Rail wasn't just running now. They were fighting back. The ship's systems surged with energy, and they could feel the power building. "You're ready," the stranger said. "Activate the ship's defenses. Let the Crimson Key guide you. Rail hesitated only for a second before pressing a button on the console. Instantly, the ship's exterior shimmered, becoming nearly invisible to the enemy's sensors. The Syndicate ships, momentarily thrown off, hesitated, just long enough for Rail to make their move. With a deep breath, Rail dove into the asteroid field, the ship's engines humming with an intensity that matched their own growing resolve. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting for humanity's future, and the time had come to prove that they were ready to lead. Rail's pulse surged as the ship tore through the asteroid field, every maneuver calculated to perfection. The Syndicate ships, now completely disoriented by the sudden disappearance of their prey, were scrambling to regain control. But Rail wasn't just running anymore. The ship thrummed with energy, the Crimson Key's power flowing through them like a second heartbeat. The ship's AA hummed softly in the background, as if offering silent guidance. Rail could feel the ship's full capabilities awakening, and with every twist and turn, their connection to the vessel deepened. It was no longer just an escape route. It was a weapon, a sanctuary, and perhaps the last hope for all of humanity. Suddenly, a blaring alarm interrupted the quiet hum of the cockpit, breaking Rail's focus. The sensors had detected an incoming attack. The Syndicate had regained their bearings and was closing in fast. "Brace yourself," the stranger's voice crackled through the comms. "They're sending in their elite fighters. You need to focus. We can't afford to let them get a lock on us." Rail's fingers flew over the controls, bringing the ship into a high-speed roll. The Syndicate's fighters, a squadron of sleek, advanced ships, had arrived. They came in fast, their weapons locked and ready. The first blast of laser fire streaked past the ship's hull, narrowly missing. The second hit the shield, shaking the ship violently. "Shields holding," Rail muttered to themselves, focusing on the task at hand. The ship's energy shield flickered but held firm. How do we fight back? The stranger's voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency. The ship is equipped with advanced weapons, energy cannons, photon torpedoes, and the Crimson Key's unique ability. The moment you feel the connection, activate it. Rail's brow furrowed. "What do you mean by the Crimson Key's ability?" "You'll know when the time comes," the stranger replied cryptically. "Just trust it." Rail didn't have time to question further. The first of the Syndicate's fighters came into range, firing relentlessly. Rail reacted instinctively, duking to the side and engaging the ship's advanced countermeasures. A burst of flares shot out from the ship, momentarily blinding the enemy's targeting systems. The Syndicate pilot cursed as their shot went wide, but they quickly corrected, closing in again. Rail wasn't just dodging now. They were anticipating the enemy's every move. The Crimson Key within the ship seemed to guide their hand, offering a clarity of thought that transcended the chaos of battle. Their instincts were sharper, the ship responding with fluid precision. They engaged the weapons, the ship's energy cannons lighting up the void as they took a shot at the approaching fighter. A direct hit. The enemy fighter exploded in a shower of sparks, its remnants tumbling into the asteroid field, now little more than debris. Rail's heart pounded, but there was no time to celebrate. More Syndicate ships were closing in fast, their numbers overwhelming. "We're not out of this yet," the stranger said, his voice urgent. "The Syndicate will throw everything they have at you. Don't let your guard down." Rail gritted their teeth and pulled the ship into a series of erratic evasive maneuvers, avoiding another barrage of laser fire. The Syndicate ships were relentless, but they weren't prepared for the raw power that Rail now wielded. With every shot fired from the ship's weapons, Rail could feel the Crimson Key strengthening their resolve, its energy surging through the hull and into their very bones. Another fighter was on their tail, its weapons locked and ready to fire. Rail's heart skipped a beat. Time seemed to slow as they took a deep breath, the weight of their lineage, of their responsibility, settling over them like a mantle. They were no longer just a survivor. They were the Heir, the leader humanity had been waiting for. A flash of light filled the cockpit, a sudden burst of understanding flooding Rail's mind. Now, the voice whispered, faint but clear. Rail's hand slammed the control lever forward, engaging the ship's most powerful weapon, the Crimson Beam. The ship's core flared with a blinding light as the weapon powered up, a vast, concentrated pulse of energy that shot toward the Syndicate fighter. The beam struck with precision, the energy tearing through the enemy ship's shields and cutting straight through its hull. The fighter disintegrated in an explosion of light, and the other Syndicate ships pulled back, momentarily stunned by the sheer destructive force. But Rail wasn't finished. They knew this was just the beginning. "We're not safe yet." The stranger's voice was tight with concern. "You've unlocked the first stage of the ship's power, but the Syndicate will come in waves. We need to get to the outer rim, where we can regroup and plan our next move." Rail nodded, their mind already shifting gears. The battle had just begun, but they now understood one thing. The power of their heritage was real, and it would be the weapon that would lead humanity's charge back into the stars. With a firm grip on the controls, Rail pushed the ship forward into the darkness, ready for whatever the Syndicate would throw at them next. Rail's hands were steady as they piloted the ship through the void. The recent battle had left their body tingling with adrenaline, but there was no time to revel in the victory. The Syndicate's ships were regrouping, and they were far from finished. Every movement Rail made, every decision, carried the weight of their heritage and the future of humanity. The stars outside the viewport were cold and distant, yet they felt closer now. The deeper Rail delved into the power of the Crimson Key, the more connected they felt to the legacy of Earth, to the warriors who had once commanded these ships. The key was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol, a piece of their past, that could lead to a future unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. "We're not alone." The stranger's voice came through the comms, breaking Rail's thoughts. "The Syndicate isn't the only threat in this part of the galaxy." Rail's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "The Outer Rim is a battlefield," the stranger explained. "The Syndicate controls most of it, but there are other factions, other forces vying for power. Some are worse than the Syndicate. We need to be careful. Trust no one." Rail took a deep breath, eyes narrowing. It was clear now. The journey wasn't just about escaping the Syndicate. It was about navigating a complex web of alliances, enemies, and broken promises. The Crimson Key could offer them the strength to fight, but it couldn't solve every problem. Rail had to learn how to lead, how to make decisions that would shape not only their fate, but the fate of countless others. The ship's sensors beeped, snapping Rail back to the present. A new signature had appeared on the edge of their sensors, something large and fast. The stranger's voice was urgent. "Rail, divert course. They spotted us. It's a Syndicate patrol, but they're not alone. There's another ship nearby. A warship. You don't want to find out who's piloting it." Rail's instincts kicked in, and they veered the ship hard to port, hoping to evade the oncoming patrol. The ship responded with ease, gliding through the blackness like an extension of Rail's will. Still, the unknown warship was closing in, and the patrol was relentless. A holographic map flickered to life in front of Rail, showing the exact trajectory of the approaching forces. The Syndicate ships had nearly locked onto their position. time was running out. "Can you give me any more information on that warship?" Rail asked, scanning the systems for any intel. "There's a lot we don't know," the stranger replied. "What I do know is that it's heavily armed. The Syndicate doesn't field ships like that. Whoever's controlling it has resources, and they aren't here to play nice." Rail gritted their teeth. There was no escaping the oncoming storm. The warship would reach them soon, and the patrol wasn't far behind. The battlefield was closing in, and Rail had no choice but to prepare for the worst. The ship's A hummed, giving Rail the final tools they would need. The Crimson Key's energy surged through the ship's systems, feeding into the weapons array and the engines. The ship was a weapon, not just a vessel. It could fight, it could survive, and Rail knew how to use it now. "Get ready," the stranger warned. "You're about to face something you haven't dealt with before." The first of the Syndicate patrol ships entered the firing range, and Rail didn't hesitate. The weapons came online, and they fired a full salvo, energy bolts flashing through the darkness. One patrol ship exploded in a fiery blast. Another, caught by surprise, veered off course, and Rail used the opportunity to dive deeper into the asteroid belt ahead. The warship was now close enough to lock on, and Rail could feel its presence, something massive, looming like a predator in the shadows. They could hear the distant hum of its weapons charging, feel the weight of its power as it inched closer. Rail's fingers flew over the controls. "I'm not running anymore," they said, voice low with resolve. With a twist of the throttle, the ship surged forward, straight into the heart of the asteroid field. The Syndicate patrols had been dealt with for now, but the warship was a different beast entirely. Rail had no intention of running this time. The Crimson Key had awakened something inside them, a fury they hadn't known existed. The warship fired, and the beam streaked through the dark, too close. Rail pulled the ship into a dizzying barrel roll, narrowly avoiding the blast. They felt the ship's hull shudder as the blast missed by inches, but the heat was overwhelming. A glancing blow from the warship's weapons system sent a ripple through the shields. But Rail was ready. They slammed the ship into a hard turn, pulling the weapons targeting system into focus. The warship was now in the perfect firing range, its weapons charging once more. This was the moment. Rail pressed the button, and the crimson beam erupted from the ship's core. The pulse shot forward, a streak of burning light in the darkness. The warship's shields flickered, then failed entirely. With a final resonating explosion, the warship disintegrated, its hulking mass breaking apart in the vacuum of space. Rail let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. The battle was over, for now. But the danger was far from finished. The stars ahead were still filled with unknown threats. Rail couldn't afford to relax, not yet. They had come this far, and the road ahead would demand everything they had. "We've won this round," the stranger said, a note of approval in his voice. "But remember, this is only the beginning." Rail nodded, their grip on the controls tightening. The future was uncertain, but they were ready. The heir to humanity's legacy was no longer hiding from their destiny. They were stepping into it, one decision at a time. Rail sat in the cockpit, watching the remnants of the warship drift into the void. The battle was over, but the consequences were just beginning to settle in. Their fingers hovered over the controls as the ship drifted toward the edge of the asteroid field. The silence that followed the chaos was almost surreal, a stark contrast to the storm of adrenaline and fear they'd just experienced. The stranger's voice crackled through the comms, breaking the stillness. "You've done well, Rail, but don't think for a second that this is the end. We've only begun to scratch the surface of what's coming." Rail exhaled slowly, their gaze steady on the stars ahead. The ship had been battered, but it still held together. The Crimson Key's power had saved them today, but they knew better than to rely solely on it. The Syndicate wasn't the only threat they'd face. The galaxy was full of dangers, and Rail had to be ready for whatever would come next. "How do we move forward?" Rail asked, their voice steady but laced with determination. "I've got the power, the ship, but I don't know where to go from here." The stranger paused, as if considering their response. The Crimson Key is a weapon, but it's also a map. It holds the coordinates to places long forgotten, ancient hubs of power that humanity once controlled. But to access that power, you'll need more than just the ship. You'll need allies, and you'll need to know who to trust. Rail nodded, absorbing the weight of the stranger's words. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building something new, something bigger than themselves. "Where do we start?" Rail asked, their resolve growing stronger with each passing moment. "We can't just keep running." The stranger's voice softened, almost wistful. "The Syndicate's reach is vast, but it's not invincible. There are pockets of resistance scattered across the galaxy. Factions that still remember the old days, still believe in what humanity can achieve. If we unite them, we might stand a chance." Rail's thoughts turned inward. They had seen the destruction wrought by the Syndicate, and they knew firsthand the kind of power that could be unleashed if left unchecked. But they also knew that humanity wasn't defeated. Not yet. They glanced at the holomap on the console, tracing a path through the galaxy. There were scattered points of light, some marked with coordinates they didn't fully understand, others with names that seemed distant, forgotten. Each represented a potential ally or a potential threat. "I'll need to make contact," Rail said, more to themselves than anyone else. "And I'll need to move fast. The Syndicate won't sit back and let us rebuild." "You'll have to be careful," the stranger warned. "They have eyes everywhere, and they won't hesitate to strike first. You've already made an enemy of their top commanders. Now, they'll come for you." Rail clenched their jaw, fingers tightening around the controls. "Let them come." There was a brief silence before the stranger's voice came through again, softer now. "You've got the heart of a leader, Rail. Just don't lose sight of who you're fighting for. The galaxy needs hope, and you're the one who can bring it." Rail's eyes shifted back to the stars, their fingers gently tracing the holomap once more. The galaxy was vast, filled with uncertainty, but also with untold potential. Humanity had once ruled the stars, and now, after all this time, Rail could feel that legacy stirring once again. "We'll rebuild," Rail declared, voice steady and unwavering. "We'll unite the galaxy, and we'll bring the Syndicate to its knees. We won't just survive this time, we'll thrive, and I'll make sure of it." With a final look at the stars outside, Rail activated the ship's engines, sending them hurtling forward into the unknown. There was no turning back now. The Crimson Key had awakened, and with it, a new chapter for humanity. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but Rail wasn't afraid. They were no longer just the last Heir. They were the leader humanity had waited for, the one who would return to lead them back to greatness. As the ship soared deeper into the galaxy, Rail knew that the future was in their hands, and they were ready to claim it.